Welcome to Truth Behind History, where we explore some of the most fascinating and unexpected stories the past has to offer. Today, we're stepping back into 17th century Holland to uncover one of the strangest economic tales in history. This is the story of Tulip Mania, a time when ordinary flowers were traded like gold, and the entire country caught a fever that would eventually leave many broken and bewildered. Now, imagine this. It's the Dutch Golden Age. The streets are buzzing with prosperity, art, science, and trade are flourishing. And somewhere among the chatter of markets and the clink of guilders, tulips, yes, tulips, quietly begin their rise to stardom. What began as a fascination with a beautiful flower evolved into a frenzy of speculation. Prices surged to absurd heights, and then, almost overnight, the whole thing collapsed in spectacular fashion. Historians often point to Tulip Mania as the first ever recorded speculative bubble. It's not just about flowers. It's a window into human behavior, irrational markets, and the dangerous dance between greed and glamour. People weren't just buying tulips, they were buying dreams of easy wealth, social status, and bragging rights at lavish dinner parties. At the peak, owning a rare tulip bulb was like owning a Ferrari today, flashy, luxurious, and very, very expensive. So what made these flowers so special? How did they grip an entire society's imagination? And what exactly caused it all to fall apart? Well, stick around, because in this video, we'll dig into the roots of the mania, trace the speculative spiral, and see what lessons this flowery fiasco still holds for us today. Let's get into it. To really understand how tulips became the hottest commodity in 17th century Holland, we need to look at the world they bloomed in. The Dutch Republic in the 1600s wasn't just a powerful trading nation, it was the beating heart of global commerce, innovation, and cultural sophistication. This period, known as the Dutch Golden Age, saw the rise of a wealthy merchant class, the expansion of overseas trade, and a flourishing of the arts and sciences. Amsterdam, in particular, was a financial powerhouse. Ships from the Dutch East India Company were bringing back spices, silks, and exotic goods from around the world. People were getting rich, really rich, and they were looking for ways to show it. Now enter the tulip. These flowers didn't grow naturally in Europe. They were introduced from the Ottoman Empire sometime in the late 1500s. At first, they were a rare curiosity, beautiful, delicate, and different from anything Europeans had ever seen. Their bold colors and unique petal shapes set them apart from the local flora, and it didn't take long before tulips became a favorite among botanists, collectors, and yes, the wealthy elite. But these weren't just any flowers. The most prized tulips were the rarest varieties, especially those with striking patterns or unusual colors. These tulips became luxury goods, status symbols. Displaying them in your garden or having a few bulbs on hand was a way of saying, "I've made it. I'm cultured. I'm successful." In a society that was rapidly growing wealthier and more image-conscious, tulips fit perfectly into the social fabric. They were exotic, expensive, and ephemeral. And as you'll soon see, that was the perfect recipe for a speculative craze. Now let's talk about how tulips went from garden favorites to economic insanity. It all starts with a particular kind of tulip, the variegated tulip. These weren't just any ordinary flower. They had wild, streaked colors that looked like flames or marble swirls. People went crazy for them. But here's the twist, those striking patterns weren't a natural feature. They were actually caused by a virus, a mosaic virus, to be specific, that infected the bulb and disrupted the pigmentation in the petals. But nobody knew that at the time. To them, these were rare, almost magical creations of nature, unpredictable and impossible to reproduce with any certainty. Because of their beauty and rarity, these tulips fetched the highest prices. People began to view them not just as flowers, but as assets, investments. You weren't buying a bulb, you were buying potential. And that's when things started to spiral. Between the year 1634 and early 1637, tulip prices exploded. We're talking about dramatic, almost surreal price increases. A single bulb could multiply in value many times over in just a few weeks. The market was driven almost entirely by speculation. Buyers were no longer people who wanted to plant tulips, they were investors, hoping to flip bulbs for a quick profit. Everyone believed prices would just keep going up, indefinitely. And then there's the most famous example of all, the Semper Augustus tulip. This wasn't just any flower, it was the crown jewel of the tulip world. In one recorded case, a single bulb reportedly sold for 10 times the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. Imagine that, one flower bulb worth more than a year's worth of hard labor. That's the level of hype we're talking about. And when anything reaches those kinds of extremes, you can probably guess what's coming next. At this point, the tulip market wasn't just growing, it was boiling over. What started as curiosity and admiration had turned into a full-blown speculative frenzy. And like any good financial bubble, it was fueled by new ways to make fast money. One of the biggest drivers was the use of futures contracts. This is where things got especially risky. People began buying and selling tulips that didn't even exist yet, at least, not in their hands. They would agree to purchase bulbs at a set price for future delivery, gambling that prices would keep rising in the meantime. It was like playing the stock market, but with flowers. And it added rocket fuel to an already overheated system. But it wasn't just casual gamblers getting in on the action. Investors started mortgaging their homes. They liquidated valuable assets. Some even sold family heirlooms just to buy into the tulip trade. These weren't backyard gardeners anymore, they were all-in speculators, betting their livelihoods on a bulb that might never bloom, or worse, never be delivered. And then came the social contagion, the psychological virus that spreads even faster than the mosaic one. Everyone wanted in. From bakers and butchers to nobles and scholars, the Dutch population caught a serious case of FOMO, the fear of missing out. It didn't matter who you were, if you weren't in the tulip game, you were being left behind. And if your neighbor got rich from a flower, well, suddenly it didn't seem so crazy to take a little risk. At the peak, it felt like a sure thing. Prices kept rising, fortunes were made overnight, and the belief that the market could only go up was so widespread, so unquestioned, that no one seemed to consider what would happen if, or when, it all went the other way. And then, just like that, the bubble burst. It didn't happen with a bang. It started quietly. In early 1637, at a routine tulip auction in Haarlem, something strange occurred. For the first time in years, nobody was willing to meet the asking price. No buyers, just silence. That silence spread like wildfire. Confidence in the market evaporated almost instantly. Panic set in. People who had paid outrageous sums for tulip futures suddenly realized that there was no one left to sell to. Prices plummeted. Within days, tulips that had been worth the price of a luxurious house were suddenly worth no more than a basket of onions. And the crash didn't just hurt the rich, it hurt everyone who had gotten swept up in the mania. Middle-class traders, artisans, and families who had staked their savings, or their futures, on these flowers were left holding the bag. Or, more accurately, left holding a bulb that was now nearly worthless. Now, it's important to note, while this event was a major collapse in speculative behavior, the actual economic damage wasn't quite as apocalyptic as some stories suggest. The broader Dutch economy survived. The banks didn't collapse. But for many individuals, especially those who had borrowed or risked everything, the impact was devastating. Tulip mania wasn't just about money, it was about belief that prices would keep rising, that a flower could be a path to riches, that this time was different. When that belief cracked, the whole system collapsed. And just like that, the tulip market withered away. In the aftermath of the crash, the Dutch were left with more than just worthless bulbs, they were left with hard lessons and a society full of bruised egos. Lawsuits flooded the courts. Buyers refused to pay for tulips they had agreed to purchase at pre-crash prices. Sellers, desperate to recover their losses, demanded enforcement, but the courts were unsure how to proceed. These were not official contracts in the traditional legal sense. They were informal agreements, often made in taverns, and sealed with little more than a handshake and a drink. In many cases, judges simply refused to enforce the deals, recognizing how reckless and speculative they had been from the start. As the dust settled, a kind of social embarrassment lingered. People didn't want to talk about how much they had lost. For many, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when greed overtakes reason. Artists began mocking tulip speculators in paintings and satirical prints. Pamphlets circulated, painting the mania as absurd and foolish. The tulip, once a symbol of luxury and sophistication, had become a punchline. But despite the crash, tulips never disappeared from Dutch culture. They remained popular, just not at the insane prices they once commanded. The flower industry in the Netherlands continued to grow. In fact, it eventually became one of the country's most iconic exports. Tulips went back to being flowers again. Beautiful, yes, but not the keys to overnight fortune. The aftermath of tulip mania revealed something deeper than a simple market correction. It exposed the vulnerability of even the most rational and prosperous societies to collective delusion, and it left behind a legacy, one that would echo through history every time markets got too hot, too fast, and too confident. So, what can we actually learn from this whole tulip mess? Well, tulip mania has become more than just a strange story from the past. It's now a symbol, a metaphor used by economists, historians, and everyday investors to describe any situation where asset prices spiral out of control. From the dot-com bubble to the housing crash to crypto hype, Tulip Mania gets name-dropped whenever markets start behaving like they've had too much sugar and not enough sleep. But beyond the catchy comparisons, the lessons are timeless. First, humans are emotional creatures. We like to think we're rational, but time and again, we see how quickly people can get swept up in a frenzy, especially when money's on the line. Greed, fear, hope, status, all of it gets baked into the market cake. Second, just because something is going up in value doesn't mean it's worth that value. During Tulip Mania, prices weren't rising because the flowers were becoming more useful or rare. They were rising because people believed someone else would pay more tomorrow. That kind of thinking is the heart of a bubble. And finally, bubbles don't need technology, complex financial instruments, or even modern economies to form. All they need is a little excitement, a hint of scarcity, and a crowd willing to believe the fantasy. Tulip Mania might feel like a quirky chapter in economic history, but its roots run deep into the psychology of markets and of people. It's a reminder that anytime we hear the words "it's different this time," we should probably pause and take a closer look. So the next time you see a market booming beyond belief, whether it's in stocks, real estate, crypto, or yes, even flowers, think back to 17th century Holland. And remember that sometimes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. If you enjoyed this dive into history's most famous flower fiasco, make sure to like the video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to Truth Behind History for more strange, fascinating, and sometimes downright unbelievable stories from the past. Check out our other videos if you're into historical twists, economic mysteries, or just love a good cautionary tale. Thanks for watching, and keep questioning the stories you think you know.